Hi, I'm Beck. I'm the Director of Psychology and Psychotherapy for SLAM. Thank you for coming to this broadcast. Today we're going to talk to three people about the Young Black Men's Project in Lambeth, which is very exciting. If you remember that the purpose of these broadcasts is to really look at psychological resilience building and the great work that's going on in our local communities to do that work, and some of the connections that psychologists and psychotherapists and other practitioners have developed with those third sector partners to think about how to support people to prevent mental health problems emerging, or perhaps to help them access services in more appropriate ways. So that's obviously particularly important during the pandemic, which is a time when people are struggling particularly. And of course, we all know the risks for BAME people of the virus. So I'll just start then by asking Chanelle, if you could tell us a little bit about the Black Men's Project and how it came about. You're on mute, Chanelle.
I'm happy to. Do you want me to introduce myself?
Yes, please.
So my name's Chanelle Myrie. I'm a clinical psychologist and I currently work in Southwark's early intervention and psychosis service.
That's fantastic. Sorry, I should have asked everybody to introduce themselves first, and you're quite right. So let's get everyone to introduce themselves first, and then we'll move to talking about the project. So Taiwo, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Taiwo Azeez. I was the research assistant for this project, and I work at SLAM in the mental health promotion team.
Thanks, Taiwo. Sadiki.
Hi everyone, my name is Sadiki Harris. I'm the communications lead at Black Thrive, and I just did some of the designing in this project.
Thanks so much, Sadiki. And back to you, Chanelle. Can you tell us about the Young Black Men's Project?
Sure, thanks. So this project came about when I was the head of the mental health promotion team, which is the team that Taiwo is currently in. And that team is based in SLAM. A lot of people don't actually know that this team exists, but the team is based in SLAM, and the remit of the team is to focus on awareness raising within SLAM's 4 boroughs. And so it does a lot of teaching, training, workshops, but it also does community development work as well. And so in conversation with some of the commissioners, we designed this project because Lambeth commissioners in particular were really aware of the issues that you raised earlier, Al, about the overrepresentation of BME men and women, but they were interested in men in particular in mental health services and thinking about access and help seeking. And when I was training to be a clinical psychologist, my doctoral thesis was focused on young Black men's conceptualizations of their well-being and how that related to help seeking. And so it seemed to make sense that actually this project could be an extension or continuation of that work. And some of the recommendations were looking at thinking about what sort of help seeking suits young Black men's needs, what they would find accessible. So we used that research in a way to frame this project. So we decided to think about how we would know for sure that we were offering an intervention that was going to meet the needs of young Black men, that would be accessible, that they would want to engage in, and then secondary to that, how we would be able to roll that out. So those were the kind of aims of the project, really.
That's so interesting. And Taiwo, I wonder if you can tell us about what makes this work different. I mean, have we done stuff like this before? It seems incredible if we haven't.
Yeah, sure. Well, the quick short answer to that is not really no, and that's why we felt it was so important. What makes this project different is that we really, really wanted to put Black men at the heart of the change-making process. Like we've all said, or you both said, Black men are not using services. We've known that for a long time in the literature, but there isn't a lot of information or research that's been done speaking to Black men directly to say, okay, actually, what do services need to look like? What do we need to change in order for you to use a service that you'd find helpful? and that's really going to be beneficial to their mental well-being. So that's what we did. We essentially handed the mic over to Black men, and we said, you know, we're here to listen to what you want. You tell us what's going to work. So we did a series of focus groups and interviews with Black men in Lambeth, and we asked them directly, what type of interventions or suggestions would be useful to you? And what came out overwhelmingly from that is that there was a real sort of sense of fear around using services. Black men didn't feel safe to use what's currently on offer. And the reason why that was mainly was because they didn't see or wasn't exposed to people that look like them. So there was a real fear around, if I speak to somebody or if I go and see somebody, number one, they're not really going to look like me. Are they going to understand me? Are they going to be really able to appreciate my experiences as a Black man, as a Black GBTQ man? Because we did a focus group specifically with the GBTQ community, and there's a real fear of, can I be my most authentic self in these services? Are they going to be able to relate to me? Am I going to be able to speak to someone who can relate to me? And unfortunately, the overwhelming sense was no, and that's why they were staying away. So when we did actually ask them, what type of services would you like to use? There was a whole range of things that came back. We had about 30 odd suggestions. And then we asked the Black men to vote. We had things from mental health sort of weekend retreat away. We had a drop-in centre that was facilitated by Black men. We had a club night. We had just, you know, one-to-one therapy groups. What came out top was one-to-one therapy. The second one was group interventions, physical group interventions. And then the third one was groups that were speaking about mental health awareness and knowledge. And what was really interesting was that even though there was lots of different suggestions, the scores between those top three were very few and far between. So it wasn't very much between them. And the reoccurring thing that came out of the interviews was, actually, it's not one size fits all. Even though this may work for me, it may not work for another Black man. So there was a real sense of there has to be choice. But most importantly, whatever the intervention is or whoever's delivering the intervention, I really want them to look more like me. I want them to be more chance of me picking up the phone or speaking to somebody who looks like me and having that diversity.
So can I just ask you there, Taiwo, because you've raised this question of intersectionality there, haven't you? And, you know, people being LGBTQ and Black, and you've said people that need to look like me, but I'm interested why, whether or not people were requesting practitioners who were also LGBTQ or had some other, kind of mirroring feature that would make people feel safe, or isn't that something that was particularly explored in this project? Or did you feel that their racial identity was the most important feature?
Oh, no, 100%. That intersectionality came out very, very strongly. You know, they wanted the Black men, they wanted practitioners who were Black and could identify with them. But then the Black GBTQ men, there was definitely something about, I need to feel safe. And in order to feel safe, I need to have that sort of assurance that the person I'm speaking to can really identify and understand the experiences that I have. So definitely I would prefer to speak to a Black gay man if that was possible.
And so we've had a question from the audience, which was just curious, did men from different age groups have different views on what was most helpful? So were older men in the same position as younger men, or was there a difference there? Did you notice? Perhaps Chanelle, I can ask you that question, but you have to be unmuted.
I will get the hang of it. Looking at the data, actually, that was one of our concerns, and that's why when we were doing the survey, when we were asking people, can you vote on what intervention you would like to take forward, we did stratify that the results by age, but actually we didn't find a massive amount of difference. It didn't necessarily make a difference to particularly the first most popular answer, which was individual therapy. Across the board, that was by far the most popular suggestion.
So I'm kind of interested in that, because I don't know if that's what you were expecting to find or not. Tell us a bit more about the results of the projects and you know, whether it was aligned to what you were expecting or not.
I was really surprised, I have to be honest. I think particularly as being a clinical psychologist, you know, when you open up a space and you sort of give people the briefs to say, be as creative as you like, you can have any intervention that you think is going to be useful. It was a real shock to me that actually the most useful suggestion was individual therapy. And in some ways I thought, oh gosh, that's really kind of, oh, you know, almost like, oh, okay. But from a different perspective, actually, that was so valuable, because it really highlighted something that I think we all were aware of anyways, which is that the services that are currently on offer are just not meeting the population that they're designed for. So if we're sort of expecting young black men to come forward for therapy, they're not doing that. They do want the therapy, but they don't want what's currently on offer and how it's being offered. And so it's really up to us to then think, okay, well, the need is there. Young black men are saying that they want it. What do we have to do to close that gap in order to make it accessible for them?
And what was your, you know, where did you get to in terms of what we need to do to close that gap? What was the thinking about, you know, so here we are, we're providing the services. You know, we do have black therapists like yourself, in fact, but we're not managing to get people to make use of them. So what do we need to do differently? What did your findings unpack?
So after we did the survey where we asked people to vote and individual therapy came up top, we then had a design session. So we took the most popular suggestion back to the young black men that took part, and we really tried to fine tune, okay, well, if individual therapy is what you would like, what does that need to look like? And we had loads of really helpful suggestions about the location, again, what Taiwo was mentioning, who delivers that therapy, the accessibility of it. So can it be at home rather than coming into a service? Does the service have to look like a statutory building? Can it be as and when? Does it have to be what we normally call a course of therapy? So we've got loads of information to help with that as well.
Maybe Sadiki, can I bring you in here and ask you what you learned from the project? And maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your involvement with it. So how you learned what you learned.
Well, initially, I was just approached by the director of Black Thrive, Natalie Creary, and she just said, "Oh, Sadiki, do you want to help Slam with a project?" Now, I haven't been long involved in the mental health world, so I just thought, yeah, why not? I looked at the brief, and it was talking to young black boys around Lambeth, and you know, and young people, and finding out the experience. So it sits very well with what Black Thrive want to do anyway. So really and truly, it was just a win-win from there. And so my involvement has just been so for Black Thrive, I just create like flyers, videos and this kind of stuff, and so my involvement was pretty much in the same way. But one thing I do believe is that when it comes to mental health, I think the way that we sell mental health is pretty poor in comparison to the other distractions that you have in the world. You know, I wouldn't think mental health, you can't really put mental health on a par with trainers, for example, but you know, if you need something, you want something, and we have to sell our mental health services in a similar way, not in the exact same way. But some of the flyering that I see, I just don't see how young people are going to engage with it. So I think what I wanted to do was to do something a little bit different, and I think we had a little bit more success because of it. I definitely got a couple of comments on, oh, I like this flyer, for example. I like this invitation, and I think it also encouraged the amount of retweets that we got as we were trying to get more and more young people involved in the project. So
it's just something about the marketing. You feel that the marketing is wrong, that we're what is it? We come across too corporate, too just not interesting enough for young people. What's the? Can you put your finger on it for us?
Sure. Yeah. Well. Yeah. The marketing. mental health is a hard sell anyway, because not everybody's willing to talk about mental health and mental well-being and the stigma. But what we found during this project, especially when we went to Lambeth College, which is where we got a big number of young black men to speak about their mental well-being, we found that they were actually quite aware of mental health, really and truly. And like Taiwo said, that they did want to talk, but they just didn't know the spaces where it was okay to talk about this kind of stuff. Some of them were lucky because they had parents that were willing to talk to them and bloody, but some of them, they just didn't know where to go. So for me, when I heard that as a marketing guy, that's for me is like, well, you need to put up a big massive sign saying here, you know, flashing lights and all of that stuff. But obviously we can't do that. So we do have to think about how we're selling services and how we're making it attractive for people. And Chanelle, can you add to that?
I just wanted to very quickly say two things. One is that Sadiki is presenting himself as just the marketing guy, when actually Sadiki was integral to this project. He was involved in the recruitment. He went above and beyond to make sure that actually the message about the project was disseminated far and wide. He took part in the focus groups and the interviews, and just having his presence there just added a totally different dimension to the project. And so I just wanted to interject there and just highlight that. But the other thing that Sadiki was saying was in terms of young black men just not knowing where to go. And we did so many different focus groups where people still weren't aware that actually if you wanted to access psychology, your first port of call was via the GP. So many people just weren't even aware of that. And I think that just shows us how much work we have to do if we're trying to tackle accessibility.
So there's something about marketing here, but I'm just wondering, whilst you raise the issue of the GP, and somebody in the chat has raised the problem of, why are black men more likely to be detained than other ethnic groups? And of course, the received wisdom is that's because they're not accessing services early enough. They're not getting help, early enough, whilst the problem could still maybe be contained. Are young black men accessing their GP? Shouldn't their GP be raising that with them? What's this about? What's going on here? Is that about GPs maybe not understanding that young black men have these needs? Does it get lost in conversation there? What was your understanding then? Were young black men not going to their GP? Who would like to pick that up? Taiwo, you've got your hand up.
For me, it goes back to that space of that point of, the GP is not seen as or considered a safe space, and that's why they're not going. It's the GP really understands, and then there's also, the systemic sort of barriers. Am I going to be met with prejudice? Am I going to be met with discrimination? It really keeps them away. Am I going to be mistreated? Am I going to be misdiagnosed? Am I going to be put on medication when I shouldn't be? There's a lot of negative stories out there. We've all seen it, someone's been detained, someone's been mistreated, and the fear is that going to happen to me? I don't want to risk that happening to me, so I'm going to stay away. Just going back to the marketing place, came through very, very strongly about having the correct branding, having the correct marketing, having campaigns, and it was very much about they need to, the black male mental health narrative, it needs to be more visible. They need to see themselves in magazines, they need to see themselves in adverts, they need to see themselves in adverts on TV or on YouTube. We had a fantastic suggestion from one of the black men who said, wouldn't it be great to see a YouTube advert, for example, of a black male therapist giving therapy or a black male receiving therapy, like for them to have that picture and then to see it's like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't look that unsafe. Maybe that's something I can do. So it's really about having that visibility at all stages of the mental health pathway, at all stages of the help seeking pathway, to say, okay, I'm not too afraid to reach out.
So that's really helpful though, Taiwo. So obviously there is marketing. You know, Stormzy is a great example of that. But maybe you're saying we need to do more targeted marketing. We need to think more carefully. You know, which communities are we reaching into? How do we get models who represent that community? So they may, you know, it may be a different kind of person that might need to be part of the marketing for the sort of an LGBTQ Black community from a faith, you know, multi-faith group or a Black majority church. You know, quite a different people like me need to be represented in the marketing, and the marketing needs to speak to the medium that I use. So if I communicate by, you know, kind of more agile social media platforms, then that's where we need to be. So that's really helpful. We did have a question though, and this is a bit of a challenging one. So I'll put it to you, Taiwo, as it's written down here, which is, you know, what about pride? And that sort of sense that some people see therapy as a sign of weakness. You know, how do you overcome that? How do you help people to, you know, not see it as shaming to have mental health issues and to ask for help with those mental health issues? Now, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that that's particular to Black people or any particular group of people. I think that it's a pervasive problem, but, you know, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, definitely that stigma is there for all communities. But again, out of this project, it's definitely a real particular issue within the Black community. And I think it goes back to it's destigmatizing, and it's having more visibility. And like I said, if Black men or even Black women can see themselves receiving help and knowing actually this is not an unsafe thing to do, I think it really will start breaking down that thing of, oh, this is shameful, this is not right, there must be something wrong with me, I can't get help because it's something that only weak people do. If they can really start to see their stories and it can be really normalized, I think we can get to that stage of where it doesn't have to be something that's shameful or prideful. And getting more people to speak up, getting more people, Black men and Black women who have lived experiences, to come out and say, you know what, I struggled, you know, it was scary, but I got help and it's okay. And showing them that you can go from struggling to, you know, coming out to the other end and saying, look, I'm fine, it happens to all of us, it's, you know, it's okay. I think having more of those stories out there will really show other people that, okay, if she can do it or he can do it, I can do it too, and it's not that scary.
Sadiki, I just wanted to ask you a question. It's going back to this question about what you learned from the project, but I know that when we've talked before, you were telling me about other things that might stand in the way of people kind of accessing services, and we have got a question here from somebody in the audience about where people would prefer to be seen. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, yeah, so basically, you know, I'm from Lambeth. You know, if anyone knows Ray Primary School, I went to Ray Primary School. It's on Hatford Road. And what it is that, so growing up in Lambeth, it was never a problem for me to go from where I am to the barber shop in Stockwell, for example, where I get my haircut. That's what I did for like 10 years. When we decided to do this project, we decided to have one of our focus groups in a barbershop, because barbershops have this appeal of a place where Black men can gather and talk, and it's not you know, get a haircut as well, and it's not a bad thing to do in a barbershop. So we decided to, yeah, you know, and I spoke to my barber. He was very happy. My barbershop's in Stockwell. But when I was recruiting, I was trying to recruit people from my area, which is like Kenneton. And what I've discovered is that the young people, although they were very interested in what we were doing, you know, they wanted to talk. They wanted to talk to me there and then about their problems. They did not want to go to Stockwell. So I said, why didn't you want to go to Stockwell? And he said, well, because of this problem and that problem. Now, I'm not trying to I'm not trying to stigmatize young Black men as all being involved in gangs and stuff, because it's not even about that. You could be a young Black man, you're not doing anything really, but because you're in a different area or you're going to a different area, somebody could attack you just because, you know, you're not from around here. And that's the silliness of the whole thing. So that for me was very, very sad, to be honest, because then it made me think about, even if, let's say, Lambeth was to have 3 massive come to this mental health place signs, and it was all singing, all dancing, all brilliant, would our young black men be able to access it and safely? And again, for me, it was another time where this word safety came up again. And one thing that I learned is that safety was always the issue. Can I speak safely? Is this a safe environment? Can I get there safely? It's safety, safety, safety all the way around. So that was one of the biggest things I learned, that the dynamic of Lambeth in terms of walking around or movement has changed.
Yeah, and so we need to think about that, don't we? We need to think about where we provide services, and we need to ask service people who might potentially use those services. You know, is this the sort of place you could even think about coming to? And a question for you, Chanelle, which is about, like, how far can we really go? You know, when therapy isn't Afrocentric, with a focus on dealing with the kind of the post-traumatic effects of living with the reality of discrimination, how far can we really go if we're not doing that? Does therapy have to change? Does the nature of that one-to-one intervention have to change? And I guess a kind of associated question, which you might want to pick up, is, you know, like, how credible can you be as a practitioner if you're not actively addressing inequalities in the context of the work that you do?
Okay, so I think that it's integral, I really do. I think that if you are working with a young black man and you are not talking about the entirety of that young black man's experience, including his experiences of discrimination, then you are not providing a good enough intervention for them. And I would encourage people to start thinking about how they can confidently open a space for those conversations to take place, because what black men were saying to us is that they want to talk about these issues. They want it to be a focus point in their interventions. But I also feel that actually clinicians perhaps don't necessarily have the confidence or know how to do that adequately, and so actually they don't. And the result is that clinicians don't develop in those areas, but also that young black men don't get the intervention that they want. I think that some psychological models create a space for those sorts of conversations more easily than others, and so that might be something else that we need to sort of think about. But I think actually what the kind of take-home message is that actually, if young black men are saying this is what makes an intervention work for me, it is our duty as practitioners to think about how we are providing that in our work, how we are making sure that we're using the models that can create that space, how we are evaluating whether we're actually doing that, whether we think we're creating a space or whether we are actually creating a space. And all of that is going to help develop a more effective service.
And how will we know if we're creating that space?
I think we need to ask. I think we do quite a lot of focus on evaluation in terms of outcome measures and, looking at, reduction in symptomatology. But what I think we're less skilled at is revisiting people who have taken part in therapeutic interactions with us and saying, did this address your need? Did you speak openly and honestly about the things that are causing you distress? And that's what we need to do more of.
And so Taiwo, to ask you, what are the next steps from this? What are the things that we need to do next in the project? Or how will you take this learning forward?
I think number one, it's definitely about having more projects like this and having more spaces for black men to have their voices heard, because it's not done enough. And the amount of rich information that we got from this, I mean, we could actually do so much with it. So it's creating more spaces like this for good research to be done. And then number two, it's really looking at those pathways, and it's looking at creating connections and really, really valuing and using the co-production model. Because if, like Chanelle said, if we're not responding to their needs from what they are telling us is going to work, then we're just going to keep continuing to see the same patterns that we're seeing now. So if we can really start building those relationships, like we said, having more diversity, having you know, Black staff, Black practitioners, Black outreach staff, and people with lived experience who can actually go into the communities and build these relationships. That's really what's going to start making men feel safe to come in and get the help that they need.
Last question then for you, Chanelle, which is clinical psychology training is notoriously problematic in terms of recruiting enough Black applicants. What do we need to do to change that? And I know you've worked on a clinical psychology training program, so I know you'll have the answers.
Oh, it's a massive, massive problem, and it's a massive question. I think that economically, I think clinical psychology as a profession has a lot to answer for in terms of how you get into the system. So there's massive expectation that if you want to become a clinical psychologist, at some point in time, your labour is free. You will have to give up your free time in order to develop the skills, in order to get the experience, to get on the ladder to the next job. And so that already puts people who can't do that at an economic disadvantage. And so that is the first thing that we really need to stop. We need to stop demanding that people give their free labour to do a job that needs to be done. That job needs to be done, we need to pay people to do that job. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that lots of people don't know that it is a career where, you know, that exists. So we need to make sure that we're highlighting that, we're going into schools, we're going into colleges, and you need more people that hold those positions that look exactly like what Taiwo and Sadiki were saying, that look like them.
So those are two really great ideas, and I know there's loads more that you could talk about, but we're now out of time. I'd just like to thank you, Chanelle, Taiwo and Sadiki, for a brilliant broadcast. You've really been helpful. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.